Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We're glad you're here with us. Today I want to give you a few updates. Some of you, the astute ones, will notice that we have episode 30 down, but episode 28 was last time, and you're asking, why was that? Well, that was because there was actually an episode yesterday in concert with the MedHealth Mixer. Some of you may have been able to attend that. We were glad to have those who could attend the Mixer, which was really great, and we're thankful to the MedHealth initiative for that. We're going to have some great guests today. Dr. Scott Merz is going to be on the show. Russel Jahnke is going to be on the show. Right before we get to those interviews, I want to share a couple things with you. The first is that some of you are asking, where do we get access to the older shows? And we are working on a searchable database at intobeing.com. But in lieu of that, right now there is updated access to the playlists on YouTube, as well as to each individual show, with a little title of what was inside of that show. And so you can get to it there, but more to come on that because it's going to be searchable eventually by company, by guest, if you want to find out who's in the community and what are they up to. So we're very excited about that. I wanted to bring you this one bit of news about Battelle Memorial Institute. Longtime listeners of the show will remember that Battelle was the first company to get an emergency use authorization for mask decontamination. Very novel at the time, really cool. I want this to be, though, an instructive point to those of us who are working with the agency with novel startups, because Battelle just got a warning letter from the FDA for their decontamination system. And if you look below, it says that the FDA had written them and had requested information about Battelle's process for submitting reportable adverse events to FDA. I think both of our guests today will be able to talk about this as well. This is an often overlooked element. We often think, can I get clearance? This is wonderful. I got clearance with the agency, but then not think about what the post-market activities are that have to be done. And it sounds like the medical device reporting requirements for Battelle may not have happened here. And so Battelle responded to the agency on August 12th and said that they did have a process in place and that they had not identified any reportable adverse events through August 7th, but the agency then follows up and says that FDA has reviewed the information provided and has determined that you are not in compliance because you do not have the processes in place in accordance with 21 CFR Part 803. And they go on to describe some of those deficiencies. But as many of us experience in the med device startup space, it's one thing to get clearance, it's one thing to get on the market, it's another thing to maintain it by complying with those post-market requirements. And the willingness to collect and have the processes to collect that information is a critical and core part of that. So unfortunately, Battelle in a little bit of hot water here, but hopefully they can make their way out of that and comply with the agency's needs there. Again, it's an interesting bit of news. I'm sure some of our guests will have a lot to say about that because that's something we see very commonly in the med device space. And speaking of the med device space, I want to welcome our first guest, Dr. Scott Merz, who is the co-founder of MC3 Cardiopulmonary. Back in 1991, Scott has seen many things over the years in his nearly 30 years in the industry. I want to welcome him live to the show now. He has been in startups, research and development, regulatory fundraising, partnering, and Scott is a charter member of the Extracorporeal Life Support Organization, and he is just a long-standing leader in the cardiopulmonary community. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gene. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's great. It's great to have you. You are and your company, a hidden gem in Dexter, Michigan. I want to get into the company in just a minute and have everyone learn more about MC3 because you guys have been part of this community for, I mean, it's been nearly 30 years now, right?
That's right, yes.
That's incredible. But let's start here. I want to know, and our audience wants to know, what's your passion, Scott? What drives you when it comes to this community and the work that you do?
Yeah, I could sum up my passion being in the translation of technology into products that help people. That puts it in a nutshell. And being in Ann Arbor is one of the really the hottest areas and the most active areas. It's just a hotbed of ideas, and across really across Michigan in general, within universities and the private hospitals. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of great healthcare providers and researchers who've developed just remarkable ideas. And the interest is, how do we get those ideas into products that help people? And people are much more familiar with technology transfer out of universities than they used to be. When I was in graduate school at Michigan for biomedical engineering, we were working on a project that we wanted to patent and we wanted to license from university. At that time, the tech transfer office, or tech management office as it was known, was just 2 people. And now it's quite a bit larger than that. I know we've talked about that here. And it was a relatively new area, but we were very fortunate to be able to license a technology out of the university. That was the beginning of MC3, and we developed that product. It was a blood pump for cardiac surgery with a number of medtech companies around the country and in Europe. And that was really just the beginning. We spent a lot of time after that working with university inventors and physician inventors around the country with their early stage ideas and looking at how to commercialize those, and really bridging that very wide gap between the basic research and the market was really formed the basis of my passion and my interest here.
That's huge. And I think it's interesting because when we talk about translation, it's easy to think about the early stage, like inside of the university, and we've had some wonderful guests on who are involved in that, trying to get ideas out of the university. But you've spent your entire career, I think it's similar to what I've experienced, where we're outside the university, we're outside academia, we're outside the clinical world, and we're pulling from a commercial basis and trying to make that translation happen. Can you give us a little bit of an overview as to maybe just a broad overview for those who don't know MC3? Take us through maybe a little bit of the life history of MC3, some of the highlights. And then I'd like to get into maybe places where your original perceptions of how things would work have differed from your later stage, how your thought process has matured over the years. Can you take us through an arc of that?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, MC3 really had its start in that early notion of translational research and then development. And we cut our commercial teeth with our licensees over the years as we worked with that blood pump technology. But that really got us back into the university and looking at other opportunities from tech transfer and from other sources for technologies that could be translated into products and into medical devices has been our key focus and our primary focus. And some of those activities failed. They really did. They were great ideas, but really couldn't be translated into the clinic. Some of them were very successful. They all required money. So we dealt with a variety of sources, from NIH SBIR to venture capital, to private investment, to strategic partnerships. We did start a number of companies aimed at commercializing those technologies. Like I said, some of them have gone to market and others did fail. And really those failures are big lessons learned and really matured our view of things. And it's very important to discuss those failures as much as celebrate the successes in a mature startup community. Over the years, even though we worked in a number of different areas, including biomaterials, heart valves, and a variety of technologies and applications in the medical world, our passion really came from my founder and mentor, Dr. Robert Bartlett, who was a general surgeon at the University of Michigan, and he was a pioneer of a therapy called ECMO. And when I joined his lab in the 80s, ECMO was a really interesting technology, a very interesting therapy that was used on about 2,000 newborn babies a year. And it was miraculous because it saved those babies' lives, babies that otherwise would have died. But looking at it from an industry perspective, a market with 2,000 patients per year is a very difficult market to raise money for, and a very difficult market to invest in. So I recognized very early on those challenges of seeing the great promise of a technology, something that can really impact, really make a difference, but there are business realities that have to be faced there. Very fortunately, there were a number of companies like Medtronic and some others that had products that were being sold for cardiac surgery at the time. And physicians were able to use those products off label in very creative ways to conduct this therapy, ECMO, and save these babies. So industry really had very little involvement. Because of the regulations, the industry was not allowed to teach about ECMO, was not allowed to put the word ECMO on their products, was not allowed to provide literature or be involved in training. So it was a very, very unique world where this therapy and the devices associated with it really were developed within academic laboratories and within hospitals to meet a need, as opposed to being driven by industry. Industry was really on the periphery watching. Um, we at MC3 were developing some technologies and products around ECMO, and we were a little bit of a dead end because FDA did not have a way of regulating ECMO devices at the time. And with only a couple thousand cases a year, we couldn't get the money to back it. Well, we ended up in Germany, and we founded a company called Novalung with some folks over there who were very interested in ECMO, and a private investor who was really our angel investor in that effort. And we spent a lot of time at MC3 here in Ann Arbor, Dexter, supporting that effort. We did research and development here. We did regulatory efforts. We did a lot of testing. We did some of the development of the clinical training tools. But all the commercial activities happened in Europe because Europe had the means to regulate those products and really saw the growth of that market, especially in the late 2000s with the H1N1 pandemic, the precursor to today's situation. But people saw the efficacy of ECMO in that pandemic. And it was very fortunate because fast forward to today, and ECMO therapy is being used to support the worst of the COVID patients around the world very, very, very successfully. So our ECMO experience really was gained in Europe, but we always had a passion for it. And we were very fortunate that 6 years ago, we had a private investor from California, Robert Foster, who's the chairman of this company. He came in and invested in MC3, and together we said, we're going to really pursue devices specifically made for ECMO in the US and around the world, but we wanted to be the US company developing those products. And Robert Foster has incredible drive and passion and has been a wonderful supporter of us. He supported the build out of our facility here, 60,000 square foot facility in Dexter. And it's really state of the art clean room and sterile disposable manufacturing capabilities here. Then a year after that, Medtronic came back around and liked what we were doing. At that point, the FDA agreed to regulate devices. They came out with regulation to regulate ECMO devices. And so we were all inspired and motivated and very happy to see that we were going to be able to approach FDA with devices specifically for ECMO. We built out manufacturing here. We've developed products for ECMO. They're in our own manufacturing plant made entirely here in Dexter. We work very closely and very hard with FDA and some very, very, very good and smart people at the FDA to determine how we needed to test our devices to show safety and efficacy for ECMO. I'll back up a little bit for those who don't know, but ECMO is basically a small heart-lung machine that provides heart and lung support for a prolonged period of time. A heart-lung machine is used for 4 or 5 hours during surgery, and all those devices say in their indications for use that they're intended to be used during surgery for a number of hours of time. ECMO can be deployed for days, weeks, months at a time. The longest patients have been supported for over a year on ECMO, and it provides full cardiac and respiratory support for patients. It's used in a number of conditions, trauma conditions, and also infectious diseases, as I mentioned, in COVID and stage COVID patients. So we've developed products for ECMO. They're cleared for ECMO. Medtronic has partnered and invested in the company, and Medtronic is our exclusive distributor worldwide, and they've been an incredible partner in that effort.
That's an amazing journey, and one on such an important piece of technology. It must be very satisfying to see the utility of that coming along all these years later. I mean, the utility was always there, but especially with respect to COVID and other things. I think it's interesting because it seems like you guys started out, as many startups do, just doing your best to do this translation. And along the way, you've highlighted a couple things: the build out of your 13485 floor, and now investment and partnership by Medtronic. And I feel like there's a place there where some of the traditional startup story diverges, and I think it's a really neat story because you guys have seemed like you've always built back into being the best holistic entity you can be. A lot of times the focus will be on, oh, we got to get the product just out the door and dump it there. Who cares what happens next? But I sense this, you're building the facilities, you're building the infrastructure, you're building the expertise. And now a company like Medtronic has chosen to come alongside and is recognizing that. Tell us a little bit about that philosophy, because I think there's a difference that we need to learn from there in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you had asked earlier what the kind of the lessons learned were. When we started back in the early 90s, yeah, we got our device patented and we thought we were good to go. Well, that wasn't enough. And we made a pretty crude prototype and took it around to the companies, and we ended up licensing based on that prototype. But as time goes on, companies are looking for more. They're looking for you to be much further along the development path because of the regulatory and other risks and the incredible amount of money that it requires to develop these products. So the cost of admission into a company to take a technology in there and to really translate has grown over the years. And so in this way, you're right. It's kind of we called it a mature startup, where we were really building a company around some key technologies and a lot of key know-how that we had accumulated. But it took really the foresight by our private investor, Robert Foster, but also Medtronic, to come and build a company around technology, a company around existing know-how, and really invest in that ahead of that development process. Really unusual for Medtronic, and the people that we're working with in the cardiac surgery division of Medtronic showed real foresight and a lot of courage in investing in what we were doing. They could have gone out and bought a couple of companies in Europe easily and gotten into the ECMO space there. They were determined to get into ECMO. They saw the value of it. They saw what was happening. They saw it as a true growth market, but a really unusual move for a company as big as Medtronic. And it said a lot about the people that we work with there. They have a real passion for patient care, a real understanding of the potential of technology and these therapies, and they watched the market, they watched what's happening, and they watched ECMO grow and mature over the years. And as they stepped in here and we said, we don't have any products yet, we have some great ideas, we have some designs, and they go, that's just what we want, right? And back to your other point about companies getting products on the market and then having to deal with all that aftermarket stuff, compliance, quality system compliance, etc. Yeah, I think what Medtronic was doing and what they saw is that if they got in on the ground floor, it's like buying a spec house, right? So if they get in the ground floor, they can watch the development of our quality system as we were building out our 1345 facility. They can watch our product development effort. They can keep an eye on IP. They can look at a number of things that at the end of the road, what they know that they're dealing with is built properly, and they're not buying something with some hidden problems that they're going to have to turn over later. So I found it was a very, very smart move. It's very unusual. We didn't fit in their typical system. This was not their venture arm. This is one of their business units that we're dealing with directly. And they're making that investment, and they've offered resources, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful partnership, a really unique one, but very, very successful. And with the launch of our products into ECMO in the past 2 years, including our flagship device, the Nautilus ECMO module, was launched at the end of last year, and really just in time. So we are playing a part in the front line of the COVID battle right now, and very glad to be doing that. It's not easy to be launching a product under those circumstances, but we get a front row seat and really see that we can make an impact.
That's huge. It's also huge that Medtronic is recognizing this process. And I think a lot of times startups, I don't know where necessarily they get the idea, but they have this idea like, I'm going to drop this thing in front. I understand they might either like it or not like it, but they sometimes don't recognize that there are relationships being built. There's a flow, there's a process, there's a trajectory that has to be met to have these products succeed in the long term. And Medtronic's recognizing that. and they're working alongside, and they're doing this. I was just talking earlier with Andy Rader from EMA Partners, who's going to be on an upcoming show, talking about how to structure things for companies. One of the points he was making to me, and we'll hear more about in the future, I'm sure, is it's not just customer discovery, but it's really talking with potential companies that you could partner with in the future and having those conversations happen early. What can you tell us about that process? Because you've obviously successfully done that, and partnering, whether with its strategic investors like your partner from California or like Medtronic. For you, and I think a lot of people would be interested, how do those conversations happen? How do they mature? How do if people say, okay, I get it, I need to be talking with my future partners, like that's kind of the message of customer discovery at some level, and it can be the customer, or it can be the acquirer, or it can be the future partner. But how do those conversations practically happen? How do those introductions happen? How does the first conversation happen? How does the relationship mature? What does that look like for a company like yours?
It's a real challenge. I hear you on that, because working with, especially in the translational world, everybody wants to know what phone number to call to tell everybody about the patent that they just got, right? And that's a really tough thing to do. I mean, the answer is networking, and years and age help. You've been around and you've been in the community, and you really have to have a good understanding of how things work. I think one of the big lessons learned in terms of translational research is the luck of timing, right? I've watched startups, and I know a number of startups in this area that have been successful, and I know a number that have not been successful. A lot of it comes down to luck and timing, right? And did they beat that other group that was developing a similar product? Yeah, sometimes they do and they win, and sometimes they don't, they lose. So there's luck, and that's where people can't get too caught up in their successes. They have to recognize that they're fortunate, and through hard work and fortune, it's a good combination, but there's a lot of that. So getting out and talking to folks is so important, getting to know people within the industry. Now that maybe brings us around to the Michigan story, because if I'm sitting in Minneapolis, what I just said about networking is a lot easier. I can go to one bar and I can talk to every medical device company probably in the country, and same in some areas of California or Boston. And yeah, Michigan's a little bit harder. You've got to get out there. You've got to be part of those conversations and getting to meet people. And there's no reason why, or there's a good reason why there are many successes within Michigan. Maybe they're not as well recognized or well known as some of these other areas I mentioned, but there's a lot going on here. And so, thanks to efforts like yours, you're certainly getting some exposure to the MedTech community here in the state. And there is a lot going on. We're very fortunate to team up with partners and suppliers across the state. Whether that is, we work with some companies in Grand Rapids, Rose Technologies, MishBio. We're out in Kalamazoo with Safari Circuits, and some of our other suppliers across the state. So the answer is just getting out there and really understanding the process, and making sure that what you're developing is going to merge at the right time with your potential customer.
That's huge. I remember way back in the day, in my first startup, we were honestly scared of getting out there and talking, because we thought that somebody was going to steal our secret sauce, and somehow the entire cat would be let out of the bag and we wouldn't have a business anymore. And I think stories like yours show this takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of partnerships, and being willing to get out there and have the conversation is a big part of it.
Absolutely. Yes.
I want to invite our audience. We've got a few more questions we're going to talk about here, but I want to invite our audience. If you have a question for Dr. Scott Merz of MC3, I'd love for you to raise your hand in the audience, and we'll get to you in just a minute. Feel free to pop in your questions. But Scott, I think when it comes to, you mentioned the community, you mentioned sort of like this idea of critical mass in Minneapolis, in California, Bay Area. How do we get to critical mass? How do we do that as a community? What do you think how does one go from where we are today to at some point in the future where the Bay Area is today?
Yeah, it's evolution, not revolution. It takes time. It takes building of what I would call the anchor tenants. And I look at the size of Stryker and how they've grown and over the years in Kalamazoo, and wow, there's a lot going on there. And I look at companies like Terumo here in Ann Arbor, and there are other examples across the state. It really is happening. My dream is that this particular company and startup MC3 that we're working on right now is going to remain here. Yeah, there are certainly a lot of stories of companies that have been successful and grown here and then been moved by their acquirers, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Every one of those has contributed to this environment and contributed to the maturity and the knowledge and the skills and the expertise and the personnel that we get in this area of Michigan. So those are wonderful stories. But I would very much like to see MC3 remain here as a manufacturer and to grow in this area. And I think that's the answer, is we need a number of companies to be built and grow and stay here. And it's happening. It's just, again, we don't get the notoriety that some other areas do, but there's a lot going on here. And again, you're helping to spread that word. And I think that's much appreciated. And I've, as you say, I've been in town here. I'm not from here, I'm from Philadelphia, but when I moved out here 30 years ago, yeah, it was very much the automotive world, right? And the med device part was so small. And there are a lot of discussions, a lot of complaints and questions at the state level. What can we do to grow it? Well, fast forward 30 years and it's happened, really. I mean, it really has. There's a lot going on here, and there's a really obvious increase in the number of people, the amount of expertise. Even when you go out and you talk to attorneys, or you go to hire people, you go to look for suppliers, there's a lot more maturity and a lot more awareness of the med device space that's benefiting all of us. So it really has been happening, and is happening. Michigan's a very dynamic area in medical devices.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. And like you say, it's a lot of doing the basics and doing them over and over again. And hopefully we can help to feature that. As I've often asked people, outside behind the scenes, but make it a little more public here. I don't need an answer right now, but please do, Scott, since you're such a central point in the community and been here for so long, if there's anyone else you think that should come on and we should hear from as a part of the community, please do let me know offline. We'd love to know that.
Absolutely.
So, not seeing any questions right here, right now. So, Scott, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing a little bit of your story and MC3's story. And we certainly wish you and Medtronic and your team the best. And we're looking forward to hearing the next installment whenever the right time for that is.
Glad to do it anytime, Gene. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Scott. Bye-bye. It's good to hear from Scott. I know a lot of people, Scott's been very head down with all the cool things his company is doing. And so good to see him pop out and join the community for a little bit here and tell us all about what's going on. I love the point that he was making about how it takes just doing a lot of the right thing over and over again for a community to develop. And over the years, my next guest and I have often cross-pollinated and found that we resonate an awful lot. I want to welcome Russel Jahnke to the show. Russell, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me. And it's also an honor to be on with Scott. We've crossed paths a number of times, and it's great to hear from him.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I know that every time you and I have talked, we're often commiserating and sharing war stories. Russell, you're with Xoran Technologies right now, and David's been on the show before. I'd like you to, though, give us a little bit of your career history so people know who we're talking to here, and take us all the way back, which ironically, the story at some point here is going to go back to Xoran back in the day. So walk us through your career history before we talk details.
Yeah, sure. And I'll try and not go too long here, because it is a different path than most folks, certainly different than Scott and many others in the community. I am, though, an Ann Arbor kid, born and raised, graduated from Pioneer High School, in the shadow of the big house. When I graduated high school, I went into skilled trades, and I took an apprenticeship with a steel mill in the Detroit area. And it was a real unique opportunity at the time, because they were exposing me to all different types of skilled trades in that apprenticeship. So I got to do everything from heavy equipment operation, working as an electrician, pipe fitter, millwright, welder, all different types of skilled trades. And it was a really unique opportunity. And at that company, after I did hire in, and after a few years, I was pegged for a brand new research and development group at that company for developing new technologies in ventures that they were working on. I call it remote sensing, but we were working on everything from optics to magnetics to separate crushed cars into the various precious metals that are throughout these cars. And it was a really great experience because that's where I cut my teeth on learning how to do true research and technological translation into manufacturing processes that brought tons of value to the company. And that was a really unique opportunity. And I spent 10 years at that company. But then I moved on to Eaton Corporation in their fuel systems division and worked on developing passenger car fuel systems and fuel handling systems for passenger cars, which is a very highly regulated part of the industry, emissions that is. So this is fuel systems emissions that we're working on very advanced solutions for the industry. Most of the regulation came out of California. They're very progressive there, and it rolls out through the entire industry. Even Eaton Corporation, I didn't tell you this, Gene, but I also, working in that research group and new products group, was pegged to get certified as a quality system auditor. And I got certified through the Automotive Industry Action Group, AIAG, and spent a good part of 2 years traveling around to all the Eaton Corporation plants, everything from aerospace, automotive, heavy truck, and doing the quality system audits of those different plants. And I was exposed to everything. I saw it all. I saw the good, I saw the bad, I saw the ugly, and I helped those teams get their quality systems in order. At some point, I decided that, as Scott was mentioning, that there was this burgeoning MedTech field and opportunities in Michigan, and I wanted to try my hat at that. So there was this little startup company called Xoran Technologies that was actually right around the corner from my house in Ann Arbor.
What year was this, Russell?
I think this was 2003 or 4, maybe it was 2004. And I walked through the front door and applied. And it was right down on First and Miller. And that was where they were headquartered out of. It was just a 2-room suite at the time. And I think I was the 8th hire for Xoran Technologies. And I got my foot in the door by applying for a position of customer service engineer. I actually went into the field and installed these very revolutionary CT systems that also came out of the University of Michigan. It started as a graduate student project, and the initial founder and CEO of Xoran Technologies, by the name of Peja Sukovic, developed that technology. It was cone beam CT. It was something very new, and this was a new space for it, and really hit on something great. So I spent a few years doing that. Actually, and then transitioned into being a product manager at Xoran Technologies. And then later was recruited away from Xoran Technologies for another translation company out of the University of Michigan. You might have heard of Histosonics. And I was the first hire. My initial job was to build the quality system from the ground up, which we did. And I transitioned into the Director of Quality, Regulatory, and Clinical, and headed up multiple preclinical and clinical projects there at Histosonics in the early days. And I think I just read yesterday that Histosonics was approved for a multi-center single-arm study that is going to be probably the basis for their clearance in the United States in the years to come. So that's pretty exciting for them. However, I was recruited away from Histosonics back to Xoran Technologies, and that's where I am today as the Director of Product Development. And I'm fortunate to work with a fantastic team at Xoran Technologies, and I get to continue my passion for products in the MedTech space.
That's awesome. And I think it's so cool because a lot of folks don't recognize that a company like Xoran exists. We were just talking with Scott Merz of MC3, and a lot of people don't realize we have an ECMO leader here in Michigan. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we have the CT leader here in Michigan. Tell us just a bit about sort of the flagship products there so folks are aware. And then I want to ask you some startup questions.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so Xoran Technologies is the leader of cone beam CT in the ENT allergy space. We have we've had over 850 installations domestically, and then more internationally. We have presence in Europe, in Australia, South America, and Korea, and other places, Canada. And what these are small, compact CT devices that go right in the doctor's office. So any of you who have ever gone to your doctor and they've told you that you need to get some imaging done, and then you need another appointment, another day off work, and then another trip to your doctor's office, we'll really appreciate that you can get a CT at the lowest dose in the industry and have it done within 10 minutes at your doctor's office. Really a thing that really set Xoran apart in the early days, and we've continued to have products that we've introduced into the market. For example, we now have a portable CT that is used throughout the hospital, mostly in the ICU and in the operating room. So traditionally, when you've had to transport patients who are critically ill or in the middle of surgery to a radiological suite to get imaging done, that's of the past. So now you can roll one of our devices right up to the patient at the point of care, and you reduce all kinds of headaches in the hospital and clinic by bringing the device to the patient instead of the patient to the device, especially when they're critically ill.
That's so cool. Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Russ, about some of the things that you and I have often resonated together with when it comes to startup issues and development issues. You've worked as a quality and regulatory person. You've worked as a product manager. And I was going to do that generically until we ran into this thing with Battelle and their N95 decontamination system, and the FDA gives them a warning letter and says, "Sorry guys, you weren't keeping track here of you didn't have your processes in place for medical device reporting and complaints and stuff like that." So at the risk of stepping on some toes or something, I'm going to go on a limb here, and we're going to start this conversation by saying, what would you be telling Battelle right now, or what would you wish somebody had told them 3 months ago?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And in their situation, of course, I don't know all the details, but it is super exciting that they were able to get this emergency use authorization from the FDA, especially at a time when it sounds like their products could really do some good, and not only in the marketplace, but for the people who are using them. And that's really what it's all about. But you can't stop there, right? You have the processes in place that will sustain you through the entire life cycle of the product. And even though they had an emergency use authorization from the FDA, they needed to develop the processes to continue that use in the marketplace. And being progressive and out ahead of the curve on regulatory that affects your products and your market space is really key to doing all that. Gaining that knowledge and using it to your advantage can sustain you in the marketplace, but can make you one of the market leaders.
And this is something you and I have talked about previously, of getting into that regulatory strategy earlier and understanding it. But what does that actually look like? I think we hear a lot of platitudes where it's like, well, yeah, you should think about regulatory early, and you've got your regulatory roadmap, so you're good to go. But what does successfully understanding and integrating regulatory strategy early look like for a product development company? Give us some tangibles here.
Yeah, well, looking at it, really practically, is understanding that you can leverage regulatory to, not only make your business successful, but really position yourself to be a leader in the industry and not have some of these things that Scott was talking about, having the pitfalls. So when he was talking about Medtronic coming in an untraditional way and really realizing that they could be in on the ground floor and make sure that things were being done right from the very beginning, instead of uncovering, pitfalls down the road, such as not having a process in place for adverse event reporting, is, key, and they understand the value in that. As a matter of fact, I'm very passionate about the fact that the QS documentation that a company puts in place becomes a huge part of the value of the company, just as IP or market share or the secret sauce or those types of things. Having sound and regulatory compliance documented in your company is a foundation for the value of the company, because it's what allows you to operate in the space and in the markets that you operate in.
To your perception, so of that documentation and so not only the strategy, but also what you're documenting about your product, who needs to understand that within your company? How deep does that understanding need to go? Because it's very tempting, I think, to put silos up and to say, well, somebody here understands that. But how integral or non-integrated can that information be?
Yeah, so again, speaking very practically, everybody, right? So I'll give you a very practical explanation. So you have these quality system processes, right? And probably most of the people on the line here are familiar with what those are. But everything from design controls to risk management and the like. Those people who are directly involved with each of those processes. So the engineer who's designing the component needs to be not only involved in the processes that affect their work, they actually need to be part of the team that develops those processes and puts them in place, because those processes need to do two things. They need to help you achieve regulatory compliance, but they need to help your employees do their job. So if you have processes that are easy to follow because they actually help you do your job, and the byproduct is regulatory compliance, how great is that, right? And the only way you can do that is have the people who are involved in doing the work be involved in creating your processes.
Yeah, it's something the company actually has to live and the employees have to live. That's a common mistake we see, as we'll just drop that in place and no one understands it, and then suddenly you're out of compliance. And that's when warning letters tend to come, is when you got started on maybe a good path, but now you've fallen off of it and you're not doing what you said you were going to do. You had mentioned the role that regulatory decisions make in even tied with your business plan and the ability to beat your competition. And we're all aware of places where your classification of your device, and people are always wrestling, am I going to go 510K or am I going to go de novo? That's usually one of the big decision points. If so, what product code am I going to fit into if I'm a 510K? And there's all this wrestling back and forth. And oftentimes it feels like the jump between a relatively low value product code and a relatively high value one that could come with a really powerful set of claims to it, it often feels like that's the difference of millions or tens of millions of dollars. Like I can go out there and I can submit something, or I can even go class 1 and I can get something on the market, but I can't claim hardly anything about it. And then maybe there's a class 2 product code where this would be better, but it's going to cost me, a few $1,000,000, and I'm going to get my company built and my 510K out there and everything. But maybe then there's this de novo potential, and I've got to think about clinical trials and all this stuff. And I'm talking just tens and tens of millions of dollars. And there's value in each of those, but man, the price tag goes up too. How do you think about this? If you're working with a company, or with a company, and you're saying, which of these are we going to shoot for? What's going through your head? Because I know a lot of people are like, well, I either want this great set of claims, and you're looking at them going, well, that's how many tens of millions of dollars, Or they're saying, I want to do as cheaply as I can, in which case it's like, well, we'll make you a health and wellness device over here, but you can't claim anything. How do you process that in your mind?
But that, that's a complex question, and it depends on, multiple factors. Is it, are you working with an early stage company? Are you working with a more mature company who's been around the block? Are you talking about a brand new product, brand new technology that's being translated? All of those are factors into, what your decision process might be. However, I will say that in each instance, you really have got to do your marketplace homework. I mean, that has to happen first. And I think most of us know this. You need to know, where your niche is in the marketplace. Are you going to be in a crowded field? Are you first to market? Are you going to, have a complex journey based on the claims that you want for your product in the marketplace, regulatory wise? Because like you said, getting pre-market approval for the different classifications can be the difference in tens of millions of dollars. So at the end of the day, the management team has to work together with regulatory knowledge to understand, the business decisions behind the strategy that you're going to use. When you're working with the quality system and making those regulatory decisions. Because you can go fast, right? If that's what's determined to be most important, of course, you need to work toward compliance, but there's a difference between working toward compliance when you're trying to get a product to market in, say, 12 months versus working toward compliance for a product that could be 3 to 5 years out. And there are risks that need to be weighed for each of those strategies. And there needs to be full acknowledgement by the team of what those risks are. So when they do pop up, that you're ready to deal with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, going fast and going lean can be a perfectly good business strategy for the opportunity that lies ahead. Going slow and methodical is also a good business strategy for those more complex translations and products that have more risk in the marketplace.
No, it's a great point. What can you afford to lose at this point? What are the consequences downstream? And then how much time should I put in right now versus later? I've got one more question for you, Russell, but I want to ask our audience if they have any questions for Russell, please feel free to raise your hand, Russell or Xoran Technologies. And feel free to raise your hand in Zoom there. So the question that I had is, you mentioned earlier to me about the importance of documenting. For you, where does documentation start for a company, for a product development company?
Yeah, again, you're tossing me some softballs here. I appreciate that. It starts at the very beginning, and I think one of the mistakes that new companies or new early stage companies that might have people on board who are new to being in a MedTech company because they've come from the research or such, is really understanding that the documentation has to start from the very beginning. And one of the things, especially in small companies, people kind of confuse what is research and what is development, and both have very specific place in the quality management system, right? So, this is, I say that research is the act of scientifically establishing facts in areas previously unknown, okay? And again, this applies to MedTech. And development is the act of engineers and developers taking those facts or what is known and turning them into products, right? So the facts that you establish in research become the justification for your design decisions during development. And it's very important to be able to trace that all the way back, because we'll look at it from the other angle. Whatever months, weeks, years down the road, you're going to be hopefully manufacturing products and shipping them out the door. And all of those have to be tested to meet the product specifications that have been established for both hardware and performance and labeling and these types of things have all got to be tested and documented and part of the documentation for each individual product. And you've got to be able to show that not only did you implement the appropriate specifications, but you have the justification for the decisions that led to those specifications. So you can see how it goes all the way from research through development to manufacturing, and you have to have that documentation in place. A lot of people have this misconception that you can be really loosey-goosey in research. And maybe there's a corner of research where that's a little bit true, where you're just, throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. But if you really have any intentions of moving forward into the development phase of, the quality system and product development, then you've got to buckle down and start documenting from the very beginning and have good processes for those.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I love your building blocks picture where everything has to come from there. And if you didn't do it there, it might be time to go back there and then do it again, because it's the feeder for the development. We've got a question here from Ken Spencer. Ken, you're live with us.
Yes, thanks, Russell. Great presentation here. So question on the QMS stuff. Did you develop your own, or were you able to find something, quote, commercially available off the shelf to begin work on?
Yeah, so Ken, that's a really great question. And, it's kind of a little bit of both. When I was the first hire at Histosonics, we started from scratch. And, not only did we absolutely start from scratch and build a paper system for doing quality system management, at least from the beginning, we did transition to a more digital or hybrid system. But also, borrowing techniques and documents from, previous life, obviously not taking anybody's proprietary information, but using that knowledge and experience from, past experiences, and borrowing, those, methods, if you will, is very helpful. There are, out of the box, templates that you can get to help you get started if you're really starting from scratch. But mostly, I would advise getting people involved who have, experience in that space and helping develop a system that is customized to your culture, your products, and your people.
Thank you.
Great answer, great question. Yeah, with quality systems, it's always so interesting because the requirements that you're trying to meet there's a lot of different ways to meet them. And if you're Xoran Technologies or you're Terumo or you're any company, or you're the smallest startup with 2 people, how you meet those requirements, it's going to be similarities. There's also going to be some pretty major differences. And that's where templates always run into a hard time, is if your template came from a small entity, it's probably not appropriate to your big entity. And if your template came from a big entity, it's probably not quite appropriate to your small entity. And so working through that's where you can't ever separate the need to get in there and do the work.
Yeah, I agree.
That's great. Little hat tip from Kevin McLeod of C2DX. He said, this is great advice for any size company. So thank you, Russell. That's
great.
Good stuff. Great. Well, I want to thank you, Russell, for being with us today. It's great to check in today. Two great guests, both head down with their companies that they're working with. So thank you, Russell and Scott, earlier for taking the time to just come in and check in with the community and let us know what you're up to and share some of your wisdom from the trenches.
Well, thanks very much for having me, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Russell. I'll just pause for about 30 seconds to see if any of our guests online have any questions, comments, upcoming events that you'd like the community to know about. We can get the word out about that, or any questions on anything that's been on the show before. We'd be happy to address any of those. Again, I'll give just about 30 seconds for that in case there's any. And in the meantime, I want to remind you that we are updating the website. We're going to have some cool search abilities there so that you can find previous guests or previous companies that have been on the show. But right now, there's well over 100 segments that have been done here on MedTech Crossroads. And you can at least find each of those shows as well as the YouTube playlists that they're housed at intobeing.com/medtech-crossroads. And I hope you will check in on that. Not seeing any questions, I want to thank you again for being with us today on MedTech Crossroads. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Talk soon. Bye-bye.